Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the June 2010 meeting of the FCC. Let me begin by welcoming a very special guest here today from South Carolina, Mrs. Emily Clyburn is here today. Mrs. Clyburn, we welcome you. We know how proud you are of your daughter, and speaking on behalf of all of us, it's a great pleasure to work every day on this commission with Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, and thank you so much for being here today. Also today we have some additional guests. A group from Pakistan is here today as part of our International Visitors Program. They're sitting over there. Welcome. I hope your visit is enjoyable and productive, and I would like to acknowledge our International Visitors Program, a very important process of staying in touch with our counterparts around the rest of the world, and to all of our colleagues at the Visitors Program, you do a great job and we appreciate it. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda for this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes one item for your consideration. You will consider a notice of inquiry to begin an open public process to consider possible legal frameworks for broadband internet services in order to promote innovation and investment, protect and empower consumers, and bring the benefits of broadband to all Americans. This is your agenda for today. The item will be presented by the Office of General Counsel. Austin Schlick, the Commission's General Counsel, will give the introduction.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Schlick, thank you for being here. Julie, David, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Commissioners. I'm joined at the table this morning by our Deputy General Counsel, Julie Veach, and Special Counsel, David Tannenbaum, who will join me in presenting the proposed notice of inquiry. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Ann Phillips, who's in the control room this morning. She's our outstanding appellate legal, a graduate of the University of North Carolina, which may become relevant as we view the background color of the PowerPoint. So, Commissioner McDowell, I need to apologize in advance for that. She is almost literally going to walk out of the control room to the University of Michigan Law School, and we just want to thank her, and we'd love to have her back after she graduates. The item before you today asks hard questions. Some have urged that the Commission should avoid even asking these questions. They suggest that the Commission should ignore, at least for now, basic issues about its ability to fulfill a decade of promises concerning broadband, including the joint statement on broadband that you unanimously adopted 3 months ago. Staff recommends that the Commission forthrightly face these important issues without prejudging the outcome of the inquiry. The notice of inquiry that is before you today would commence a thorough, balanced agency examination of a topic that is being debated in the pages of the press, in the blogosphere, and at industry conferences. The topic is the sufficiency of the Commission's existing legal classification of broadband internet services, such as cable modem and DSL, given the change in the legal landscape that occurred on April 6, when the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit issued its opinion in Comcast versus FCC. Julie will describe the Comcast opinion more fully. In brief, the Court of Appeals adopted a narrower view of the Commission's so-called ancillary authority than the one on which the Commission has based its past broadband decisions. The Comcast case puts in doubt the Commission's continued ability to rely on its ancillary authority as the legal grounds for protecting the public interest in the broadband area. The notice of inquiry on which you will vote acknowledges this doubt and asks how the Commission should respond. Before Julie and David describe the notice and the relevant historical background and legal precedent, I'd like to focus on Section 1 of the Communications Act. Section 1 establishes the FCC for the purpose of regulating interstate and foreign commerce in communication by wire and radio, which everyone agrees includes broadband communications. Section 1 then tells the Commission how it is to exercise its powers under the Act. These powers are to be used so as to make available, so far as possible, to all the people of the United States, without discrimination, a rapid, efficient, nationwide and worldwide wire and radio communication service with adequate facilities at reasonable charges for the purpose of the national defense and for the purpose of promoting safety of life and property through the use of wire and radio communications. In a series of consistent decisions since the early 2000s, the Commission has committed itself to fulfilling Section 1's charge in the broadband age. So, for example, the Joint Statement on Broadband reaffirms that every American should have a meaningful opportunity to benefit from broadband communications era, and the Universal Service Program should be comprehensively reformed to encourage targeted investment in broadband infrastructure. Also, to make communication services available to all Americans, the Commission committed in 2005 to promote access to broadband Internet services for persons with disabilities consistent with Section 255 of the Act. In the same 2005 order, the Commission highlighted its belief that the pre-Comcast Ancillary Authority Doctrine provided sufficient legal authority for rules addressing broadband network reliability, emergency preparedness, national security, and law enforcement. Other consumer concerns, such as the privacy of communications, also have been recognized as a proper subject of Commission action in the broadband area under the FCC's ancillary authority. Comcast cast doubt on the legal approach the Commission chose in its broadband decisions over the last decade, though the Comcast Court did not consider, much less question, either the Commission's policies or the Commission's authority to support them with other legal approaches. In preparing the item before you, the staff therefore has assumed the Commission will hold to the substantive policies described in Section 1 of the Act and its own prior decisions. The questions framed in the notice of inquiry are directed at one narrow issue: how, after Comcast, can the Commission best establish a strong but appropriately limited legal foundation for broadband policies that promote competition, encourage investment and innovation, and protect consumers? Julie will discuss the historical and legal background for the NOI, and David will then describe the specific questions asked in the document.
Thank you, Austin. The history leading up to this proceeding is familiar to many here, and it reflects a consistent belief that the Commission could generally treat broadband Internet services with a light regulatory touch, while at the same time retaining its authority to step in to address specific issues that arise. The Commission's attention to communications involving computers goes back more than 4 decades to the beginning of the computer inquiries. In 1966, the Commission saw that, quote, "The modern-day electronic computer is capable of being programmed to furnish a wide variety of services, including the processing of all kinds of data and the gathering, storage, forwarding, and retrieval of information." Over the years, the computer inquiries resulted in the distinction that exists today between basic services or simple transmission and enhanced services, or services that combine basic services with computer processing applications that act on the user's information. When facilities-based common carriers offered enhanced services, they were required to separate out and offer the basic transmission service on a common carrier basis. Dial-up Internet access, then broadband Internet services such as telephone company DSL, began under this regime. Fast forward to 1996. In its amendments to the Communications Act, Congress essentially codified the Commission's distinction between basic and enhanced services. Telecommunications services are analogous to basic services, and information services to enhanced services. Broadband Internet service emerged in the 1990s, offered most predominantly by cable operators. The Commission took an initial look at Internet access services in the 1998 Stevens Report and concluded that non-facilities-based providers should not be required to contribute to the Universal Service Fund like carriers must do. The statutory classification of this service was next addressed by the courts. In 2000, the Ninth Circuit held in AT&T versus City of Portland that facilities-based cable modem service is a telecommunications service to the extent that the cable operator provides Internet transmission, and an information service to the extent the cable provider acts as a conventional ISP. Later that year, the Commission issued a notice of inquiry to consider the statutory classification of cable modem service. After reviewing a lengthy record, the Commission determined in 2002 that cable modem service is an information service. The Commission went on to decide that cable modem service does not also include a separate offering of telecommunications service, and the Commission declined to require cable operators to make their underlying transmission available on a common carrier basis, as phone companies offering DSL were required to do under the computer inquiry rules. While this decision created a disparity between cable operators and telephone companies, this disparity was short-lived. The Supreme Court reviewed the Commission's cable order in 2005. In Brand X, a majority of the court held that the Commission had reasonably interpreted an ambiguous statute in finding that cable modem service was an information service and did not contain a separate telecommunications service. 39 days after the Supreme Court's decision, the Commission brought its treatment of DSL-provided broadband internet service in line with cable modem services. It followed in 2006 and 2007 with similar decisions for broadband over power lines and wireless broadband service. In so doing, however, the Commission and its chairman never thought they were surrendering meaningful authority to achieve consumer protection goals and adopt policies to promote innovation and investment. Before the cable modem order, Chairman Kennard said that the Commission would step in to protect consumers and fair competition. Chairman Powell offered assurance at the time the cable modem order was adopted that the classification of cable modem service as an information service did not leave the Commission powerless to protect the public interest. And Chairman Martin agreed that the Commission has ancillary authority to impose regulations as necessary to protect broadband internet access. The Commission's comfort in its authority is plain on the face of the classification decisions themselves. When the Commission adopted its cable modem order in 2002, it included a notice of proposed rulemaking that sought comment on whether the Commission needed to exercise its Title I ancillary authority with regard to the provision of cable modem service. Among other things, the Commission asked whether it should require cable modem providers to make their transmission services available to competing ISPs. Similarly, in the DSL order, the Commission held that it had the authority, as well as the duty, to ensure that consumers are protected. The Commission then, too, issued a notice of proposed rulemaking to seek comment on using ancillary authority for a variety of purposes, including protecting consumers' privacy and ensuring truth in billing. But in April of this year, the Commission's understanding of its ancillary authority was shaken when the D.C. Circuit issued its opinion in the Comcast case. In the order reviewed by the Court, the Commission had addressed the network management practices of Comcast, which had been caught secretly degrading its own customers' lawful broadband traffic. The Commission ordered Comcast to disclose its past and planned practices and to submit a compliance plan detailing how it would transition away from its unreasonable practices. The Commission relied for these actions on its ancillary authority. The D.C. Circuit rejected the Commission's exercise of ancillary authority. The Court held that ancillary authority must be tied to a specific statutory delegation of regulatory authority. The Court concluded that the Commission had failed to link its decision sufficiently to any express delegation of authority in Titles 2, 3, or 6, which are the specific sections of the Communications Act that govern telecommunications, users of spectrum such as wireless providers, and cable operators. Therefore, the Court overturned the Commission's enforcement order against Comcast. Comcast represented the Commission's first concrete effort to implement the legal framework created in 2002 cable modem order. The decision shows that the Commission's existing approach is unlikely to work as it was envisioned, but the Court left the Commission with options. David will describe several possible approaches as they are outlined in the proposed notice of inquiry before you. Nothing the courts have said forecloses any of these approaches. To the contrary, in the Brand X case affirming the Commission's cable modem decision, the majority held that the Act does not establish a classification for broadband internet services, and that it makes this Commission's role to determine the classification consistent with its view of telecommunications policy. The Court also said that an agency must consider the wisdom of its policies on a continuing basis. Moreover, if, after careful examination of the record, the Commission decides to change course, it has the legal freedom to do so. The Supreme Court's Fox decision makes clear that in this situation, an agency need only acknowledge that it is changing course and explain why it believes the new approach to be better than the status quo. The Court has left the door open for the Commission to evaluate its options. David will describe how the notice of inquiry would begin the process of doing that.
Thank you, Julie. The purpose of this notice of inquiry that is before you is to initiate an open, public process to identify the best legal framework for promoting investment and innovation in broadband internet services and for protecting the consumers who use those services. The item identifies 3 potential frameworks to achieve these goals and seeks comment on the legal and policy implications of each. The first option on which the item seeks comment is to maintain the current legal framework, which treats broadband internet service as a single information service. The second option included in the item is for the Commission to identify a separate broadband internet telecommunications service that would be subject to all provisions in Title II of the Communications Act. The third item on which the item seeks comment is to identify a broadband internet telecommunications service and apply to that service only the bare minimum of Title II provisions that are necessary to implement widely supported broadband policies. Although the item specifically identifies these options for comment, it also asks the public to suggest other legal frameworks that might be better than any of these 3. It is important to emphasize that the item does not contemplate a change in the Commission's treatment of or authority over internet content, applications, or services. Nor does it propose to consider or change the Commission's treatment of backbone services, content delivery networks, or other services outside the scope of the Commission's earlier classification decisions. Under the first approach included in the item, the Commission would maintain the legal framework it first adopted in 2002. Under that framework, broadband internet services are treated as a single information service unless the internet service provider chooses otherwise. Under this approach, the Commission relies primarily on its ancillary Title I authority to support broadband policy. For some broadband policies going forward, the Commission might be able to find direct authority in specific provisions elsewhere in the Communications Act. For example, some commenters have proposed that the Commission could reform its universal service programs to include broadband by relying on Section 254 of the Act and language in the Telecommunications Act of 1996. The item asks commenters to evaluate this approach by addressing whether it would allow the Commission to achieve broadband policy goals, including reforming universal service, empowering consumers to protect their privacy online, ensuring access for individuals with disabilities, protecting public safety and homeland security, and addressing harmful practices by internet service providers, such as the ones addressed in the Comcast decision. The NOI also seeks comment on how the current framework or other legal options might facilitate alternative approaches to broadband policy, including standard setting by third parties. The second option on which the item seeks comment rests on Title II of the Communications Act. Title II provides the Commission express and direct authority to implement, for telecommunications services, broadband policies including universal service, consumer privacy, access for persons with disabilities, and other basic consumer protections. To allow the Commission to evaluate this option, the item asks commenters to refresh the factual record the Commission gathered nearly a decade ago, so the Commission can determine whether broadband internet services providers are currently offering consumers 2 distinct services. First, an internet connectivity service that provides the so-called on-ramps to the internet, and which could be classified as a telecommunications service subject to Title II. And second, a bundle of information services such as email accounts and online storage that is not and would not be subject to Title II. If internet service providers do currently offer a separate retail telecommunications service or are required to offer such a service, under the second option, the Commission would apply all of Title II's provisions to broadband internet connectivity service, including provisions that provide for tariffs, rate regulation, oversight of ISP's internal management, and resale and network access obligations. To assess this option, the item asks for comment on how broadband internet services are currently offered to consumers, how the Commission should define a broadband internet telecommunication service if it went down this route, and importantly, whether applying all of Title II's provisions would have negative effects on innovation and investment in broadband. The third option presented for comment in the item is modeled on Congress's deregulatory framework for cell phone service. As you know, in 1993, Congress directed the Commission generally to apply Title II to commercial mobile radio services, like cell phone service, but allowed the Commission to refrain from applying specific provisions of Title II. This ability to refrain from applying provisions of the Act is known as forbearance, and the Commission has since forborne from applying most, though not all, the Title II provisions to commercial radio services. This deregulatory framework has allowed huge growth in the wireless market. For example, from 1993 to 2009, the number of commercial mobile wireless connections grew from approximately 16 million to over $285 million. And in 1996, when Congress extended the Commission's authority and responsibility to forbear to wireline telecommunications services, it specifically identified forbearance as one of the tools the Commission should use to promote the deployment of advanced telecommunications capability to all Americans. The item therefore seeks comment on whether the Commission should pursue a forbearance-based approach by first determining, based on a refreshed factual record, whether ISPs currently offer a telecommunications service along with a bundle of information services. If so, the Commission would recognize the service as a telecommunications service. This would hardly break new ground. Approximately 840 local telephone companies across the country currently offer broadband connectivity as a separate telecommunications service under Title II. But unlike under the second option included in the notice of inquiry, the Commission would simultaneously forbear from all but a small number of core Title II provisions necessary to achieve broadband policy goals. These provisions would include sections that would give consumers basic protections and that provide clear authority for the Commission to reform its universal service programs to include broadband, as recommended by the National Broadband Plan. The Commission would lock in its forbearance decisions to the extent possible in order to increase predictability for investors and innovators. The item seeks comment on all aspects of this third wave framework, with a particular emphasis on the provisions from which the Commission should and should not forbear, on approaches to applying the criteria that allow the Commission to forbear, and on the Commission's options for locking in its forbearance decisions. Finally, the item seeks comment on a number of questions that apply to each of these three options and to any other approaches that commenters may propose. These include questions on how the Commission should treat terrestrial wireless and satellite broadband services, how the Commission should treat non-facilities-based ISPs, the implications for state and local regulation under each approach, the effective date that would allow providers sufficient time to implement a new framework if the Commission altered its current approach, and whether the Commission should close a proceeding it opened in 2002 to seek comment on pursuing open access for cable modem service. Although the Administrative Procedure Act does not require that this inquiry follow notice and comment procedures, the item seeks public input and will be published in the Federal Register in order to ensure that the Commission's decision-making process is as transparent and fact-based as possible. The deadline for initial comments is July 15th, and the reply comment deadline is August 12th. The public may also respond to the item via the Commission's blog and its Idea Scale application. The Office of General Counsel recommends that you vote to adopt this notice, and we request editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schleich, does that conclude your presentation?
It does, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Thank you very much. We'll now hear comments from the bench. Commissioner Copps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Austin and Julie and David, for your fine presentations. Welcome to our distinguished foreign guests. We're delighted to have you here. Welcome, Ms. Clyburn. We're delighted to have you here. Between a few big industry players who never liked the telecommunications law passed by Congress, and previous commissions only too ready to sacrifice the public interest to special interests, consumers find themselves today in quite a box. We are on the cusp of perhaps the greatest communications revolution since the printing press, yet we enter this new digital age arguably shorn of the ability to offer consumers the most basic of protections, such as ensuring their security, safeguarding their privacy, providing them with the benefits of competition, and making sure that dynamic new technologies are available to them and are open to the maximum extent possible without needless gatekeeper control at the on-ramps to the internet, into the information highway. For much of the past decade, the FCC took American consumers on a costly and damaging ride, moving broadband internet connectivity outside the statutory Title II framework that applies to telecommunications carriers. This was a major flip-flop from the historic and generally successful approach of requiring non-discrimination in our communications networks. I didn't buy it, and now we know from its Comcast decision that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals didn't buy it either. In fact, by taking the country on the joyless ride it did, the Commission essentially issued a gilt-edged invitation to the court to rule exactly as it did. Previous commissions are much more the culprit here than any court. After all, they were relying on an approach that was fundamentally at odds with the purposes set out in the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Anyone who thinks Congress envisioned deploying the new communications technologies and services of the digital age without the safeguards that generations of consumers and consumer advocates fought for and won has missed the meaning of the law and the intent of our elected representatives. I cannot believe that Congress ever envisioned that its fundamental statutory requirements could be made obsolete by a new service offering. Permitting this chaotic standoff to persist can only leave consumers, innovators, and even broadband companies themselves on an uncertain and perilous path. Today, in an effort to right the wrong-headed policies of recent years, we tackle one of the most difficult challenges ever to confront this commission. I commend Chairman Janikowski for launching this proceeding, and I encourage its speediest possible resolution. Some believe that to achieve one or more of our goals, the Commission could try on a case-by-case basis to make better articulated Title I arguments that may persuade some court somewhere. Maybe. But case-by-case inevitably becomes court case by court case. Down this path are years of dead-end delays, years without the most elemental public interest safeguards for broadband, and years of agency paralysis. It would be death by 1,000 cuts. Why rest our case on the weakest parts of the law when relying on the directly applicable stronger part of the statute is quicker, easier, and more important, consumer-friendlier? More years fighting back a costly and seemingly endless stream of court challenges to every action the Commission takes can only consign the United States to the digital dust as other countries focus on actually building out consumer-friendly advanced telecommunications, i.e. broadband. How did we get here? It's a sad but all too familiar tale where the law was twisted to shamefully promote the interests of a powerful few ahead of the interests of consumers. It began in 2002 with a notice of proposed rulemaking on the classification of broadband services delivered by wireline providers. Then just 1 month later, and over the strong dissents of Commissioner Adelstein and me, the Commission issued a declaratory ruling that moved cable modem services away from any real oversight by classifying them as unregulated information services subject only to the vague ancillary authority of Title I. Not only did that ruling place cable modem services into regulatory never-never land, but it struck at the very heart of this agency's ability to do its job of protecting public safety, promoting universal service, ensuring disabilities access, fostering competition, and safeguarding consumers in the broadband era. In my 2002 dissent, I said that the Commission was taking, quote, a gigantic leap down the road of removing core communication services from the statutory frameworks established by Congress, substituting our own judgment for that of Congress, and playing a game of regulatory musical chairs by moving technologies and services from one statutory definition to another, end quote. We moved the chairs, but it sure wasn't music. Throw into this bubbling cauldron of trouble one subsequent agency decision after another to grant big industry players forbearance from their legal requirements to promote competition and consumer choice, and you begin to get the picture of how we spent the bulk of the last decade around here. I, for one, am worried about relying only on the goodwill of a few powerful companies to achieve this country's broadband hopes and dreams. We see what price can be paid when critical industries operate with unfettered control and without reasonable and meaningful oversight. Look no further than the banking industry's role in precipitating the recent financial meltdown. Or turn on your TV and watch what is taking place right now on the Gulf Coast. Throughout the course of the Commission's deregulatory binge, we were given repeated assurances that there wasn't any need to worry. Somehow we would find enough jurisdiction under Title I ancillary authority to do our job. In truth, and not to be too conspiratorial about it, I rather believe that those who devised this abdication of our oversight responsibilities did so fully aware of what they were doing and who they were really helping. And they pressed on. In 2005, the Commission extended its oversight abdication by reclassifying DSL. By then the die had been cast, Justice Scalia and me to the contrary notwithstanding. And the challenge Commissioner Adelstein and I faced was to rescue what we could from the accident scene. About all we could manage was some, albeit inadequate, commitment that the Commission would have the ability to move forward with certain basic statutory obligations related to Homeland Security, universal service, disabilities, access, and competition, if it was wont to do so, and it wasn't often wont to do so in the following years. More formatively, we were able to win Commission adoption for the historic Statement of Policy on Internet Openness, something which I had long advocated. We couldn't get all the way there with that statement, Mr. Chairman, but we laid down the markers which I hope the present Commission will extend in the months ahead. So in sum, the Commission had moved its authority and oversight of advanced telecommunications to a part of the statute where those services would have a steep hill to climb to win even the most basic consumer safeguards. But let's be clear here. We still have the original authority the Commission moved away from. It reposes in the statute. It is there for us to use by sunup tomorrow if we choose. It rests on history, it rests on precedent, and soundly argued in court, it puts us on much firmer legal footing to survive the inevitable industry challenges that are coming anyway than does trying to stand our ground on the quicksand of Title I. We need to reclaim our authority. One other thing is at risk here, something pretty huge. I haven't yet mentioned the National Broadband Plan, the proud achievement of Chairman Janikowski's broadband team here at the Commission. The team worked for nearly a year to provide our country with something it lacked, something almost every other leading industrial country already possessed, a national strategy to encourage the deployment and adoption of high-value, high-speed broadband for every citizen in the land. The Comcast decision puts crucial parts of the National Broadband Plan in jeopardy and on hold, potentially squandering this nation's truly historic opportunity to build this vital infrastructure of the 21st century that will open so many doors for so many people. We cannot let that happen. Too much is at stake. Our global competitiveness depends on this new telecommunications infrastructure. Broadband is not technology for technology's sake. It's important because it really can be our great enabler. This is technology that intersects with every great challenge confronting our nation: improving energy efficiency, halting climate degradation, improving education for young and old too, and providing better health care for all of our citizens, helping individuals with disabilities to realize their full potential, creating new public safety tools for first responders, and opening the doors of economic and social opportunity for all. Broadband connectivity is about even more than that. Increasingly, our national conversation, our news and information, our knowledge of one another will depend on access to the Internet. Each of these challenges I have mentioned has a broadband component as part of its solution. None has a solution without this broadband component. Private enterprise must lead the way with investment and innovation in broadband, to be sure, but only when it is accompanied by visionary public policy and meaningful oversight can we ensure that broadband will get built out to places where business has no incentive to take it. We can no longer afford digital divides between haves and have-nots, between those living in big cities and those living in rural areas or on tribal lands, between the able-bodied and persons with disabilities. Since the Comcast decision, I have heard opponents of reclassification make a number of self-serving arguments that range from the often frivolous to the sometimes nonsensical. For starters, let me be clear. Despite all of the spin to the contrary, we are not talking even remotely about regulating the Internet. We are talking about meaningful oversight of the infrastructure and services that allow Americans to get to the Internet. This isn't about government regulating the Internet. It's about making sure that consumers, rather than a handful of entrenched incumbents, have maximum control over their access to the Internet. I have also heard the perplexing contention by some that the Commission cannot move back to Title II classification because there have been no changed circumstances which are supposedly needed to justify such a correction. No changed circumstances. Have the mind-bending changes we have seen throughout the country and around the world due to broadband access to the Internet been anything short of revolutionary? I don't think so. The market for broadband technologies and services and the ways in which we as a people communicate have undergone seismic changes over just the past decade. Remember that it wasn't so long ago that many Americans were just getting used to the internet, and independent internet service providers like AOL and CompuServe were the names of the game. Since then, it is a few huge access providers that have become the only real broadband game in town. Resellers and competitive local telephone companies have been driven from the field for the most part, and competition, that wonderful goal of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, reposes more in our hopes and dreams than it does on the bottom line of the monthly phone and cable bills we all get to pay. How can anyone fail to find changed circumstances in these revolutionary transformations? So let's beware of all the slick PR we hear, and remember that much of it is coming from lavishly funded corporate interests whose latest idea of a triple play is this: 1, slash the FCC's broadband authority, 2, gut the national broadband plan, and 3, kill the open internet. Today we launch a proceeding to look at the options available to us. Should we continue down our failed Title I path? Should we rely on the full range of Title II requirements and safeguards? Or should we take a third way by applying a limited number of fundamental provisions of Title II to Internet access service? I have said before that plain and simple Title II reclassification through a prompt, and by that I meant immediate declaratory ruling, accompanied by limited targeted forbearance from certain provisions, would have been the quickest and cleanest way to remove all question marks. Clear rules of the road don't just help consumers, they provide clarity and certainty to business too. My former boss, the legendary Senator Fritz Hollings, frequently reminded us that business cannot operate with a question mark. Commission policies over the past decade have been replete with question marks for business, for consumers, for all of us. So let's develop the record through this notice as quickly as we can. Let's then analyze the record, develop final recommendations, and vote them out with a sense of urgency that the situation compels. Let us put an end to a decade of detours and derailment and ensure for every American a communications infrastructure that serves their purposes, protects their interests, and vindicates the awesome promise of the digital age. Thank you.
Commissioner Copps, thank you. Commissioner McDowell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd also like to welcome our guests from Pakistan. Welcome. It's an important and interesting day here at the FCC, as you will see in a minute. And Mrs. Clyburn, I wanted to thank you for the great job you did with your daughter. She is a terrific addition here to the FCC, and I'm honored and proud to call her a colleague, and she's doing a terrific job, and I know you must be very proud of your work product, as we are too. And first, I can't emphasize enough that we all want an open internet that maximizes consumers' freedom. It is important to remember that an open and freedom-enhancing internet is what we have today as the result of a decades-old bipartisan and international consensus that governments should not interfere with internet network management issues. At the same time, authorities should discourage and punish anti-competitive conduct, and they have the legal means to do so today as they have had for decades. Before I go further, however, I thank the chairman for his graciousness and generosity throughout this debate. He has consistently extended his hand and a willingness to discuss the issues. And I'd like to underscore that 90% of what we accomplish at the FCC is not only bipartisan, but unanimous as well. I think that's important for our foreign visitors visiting us today to understand. Few governmental institutions here, anyway, can make such a claim. That also means, however, that we disagree on 1 in 10 proceedings. Disagreement and debate are healthy and necessary components of a functioning democracy. Today's notice of inquiry is one of those moments of strong but respectful disagreement. Having said that, I also thank the chairman, his legal team, and the Bureau staff for writing an NOI that contains several open-ended questions that provide ample opportunity for public comment. Nonetheless, I disagree with the premise of this proceeding, Not only is the idea of classifying broadband internet access as common carriage under Title II unnecessary, already it has caused harm in the marketplace. As a threshold matter, classifying broadband as a Title II service is not necessary to implement the recommendations of the National Broadband Plan. The Comcast decision certainly does not affect our ability to reallocate spectrum, one of the central pillars of the plan. Nor does the decision undermine our authority to reform our Universal Service Program, the other major component of the plan. In the unlikely event that a court decided against granting us Chevron deference in the pursuit of directly supporting broadband with universal service distributions, the FCC could tie future subsidies to broadband deployment. This idea was agreed to in principle by a bipartisan group of 4 commissioners, including myself, in late 2008, and I remain optimistic that we could successfully defend such an idea on appeal. In fact, the Comcast decision was quite limited in its scope. The court merely held that Title I does not grant us authority to regulate Internet network management. It reasoned that the Commission could not do so because its ancillary authority over Internet service providers was not tethered to a specific congressional mandate. In short, if the Commission would like to regulate that activity, it must wait for Congress to change the law. We are not Congress. As a young attorney 20 years ago, I cut my legal teeth on Title II. Over the decades, an overwhelming consensus emerged among tech companies and policymakers from both parties to insulate new technologies from the application of early 20th century common carrier regulations. The fundamental Title II rules from the Communications Act of 1934, which the majority seeks to apply to today's broadband sector, are the same regulations adopted in the late 19th century for the railroad monopolies. In essence, the Commission is seeking to impose 19th century style regulations designed for monopolies on competitive, dynamic, and complex 21st century Internet technologies. The ideas put forth for comment in today's NOI are not new. In fact, they were discussed and discarded in an overwhelmingly bipartisan way in the 1990s. Let's look back at a 1998 Commission report under the leadership of Bill Kennard, chairman during President Clinton's second term. And you'll notice that my background on my PowerPoint is in Duke blue. So, quote, turning specifically to the matter of Internet access, we note that classifying Internet access services as telecommunications services could have significant consequences for the global development of the Internet. We recognize the unique qualities of the Internet and do not presume that legacy regulatory frameworks are appropriately applied to it. Just 2 years later, then Chairman Kennard said, it just doesn't make sense to apply 100-year-old regulations meant for copper wires and giant switching stations to the IP networks of today. We now know that decisions once made by governments can be made better and faster by consumers, and we know that markets can move faster than laws. And here's what the Clinton White House had to say about placing legacy regulations on the Internet. We should not assume that the regulatory frameworks established over the past 60 years for telecommunications, radio, and television fit the Internet, end quote. The regulatory regime suggested by the majority today is likely to create asymmetries in the marketplace. For example, investment and innovation at the edge of the Internet, specifically devices and applications, are largely unfettered by regulation. This is as it should be. But the proposed new regime will place the heavy thumb of government on the scale of a free market to the point where innovation and investment in the core of the net are subjected to the whims of mother-may-I regulators. Although I have a tremendous amount of respect for my colleagues, no one can predict who will occupy these chairs in the future or how they will act. Or, as Senator Olympia Snowe warned the Commission in a letter earlier this month, I am concerned about the long-term implications such classification could have on innovation occurring in all segments of the Internet supply chain and the uncertainty that would prevail, since nothing precludes future commissioners from retracting the very rules you plan to implement." End quote. Moreover, the agency's dramatic attempt to regulate broadband internet access services comes at a time when consumers are demanding more convergence between the core and the edge. While consumers and their suppliers in a competitive marketplace have been erasing lines of distinction separating tech business models, the Commission is proposing to upend market trends and draw artificial legal lines to create new regulatory silos. Investors and international observers are expressing serious concerns about what the FCC is poised to do. In the past 2 weeks, I've traveled to New York and Europe. I've met with a diverse assortment of investors, market analysts, regulators, business people, and academics. At every turn, I was met with confusion and questions regarding the idea of regulating broadband as an old-fashioned phone service. For decades now, the international consensus has been for governments to keep their hands off the Internet and to leave Internet governance decisions to time-tested, non-governmental technical groups. Once that precedent is broken, it will become harder to make the case against more nefarious states that are meddling with the Internet in even more extensive ways than are contemplated here. In short, we will have lost the moral high ground. Again, a version of this scenario was foreseen by the Clinton administration's Secretary of Commerce, William Daley, in 1997. Quote, "We have been working with the private sector to convince other nations of the advantages of a user empowerment approach over cumbersome government regulation of the Internet," end quote. Today, analysts are counseling a wide variety of investors to withhold badly needed investment capital in fear of regulatory uncertainty and litigation risks. While Title II classification is being advanced in the name of furthering broadband deployment, it may have the unintended consequence of stunting growth in this sector. Or, as written this week on a business website, "But while it's business as usual now, capital investment will come down if Title II becomes a reality," said Credit Suisse Telecom Services Director Jonathan Chaplin. He said the next place companies would look to capture some of the return is costs, which would mean jobs, end quote. In fact, one recent economist study estimates that a net 1.5 million jobs could be put at risk by a Title II classification. These thoughts are not coming just from Wall Street, but from those who represent America's small and disadvantaged businesses as well. Listen to last month's remarks of David Honig of the Minority Media and Telecommunications Council. Lender and investor uncertainty stemming from potentially years of litigation over Title II reclassification could make it profoundly difficult for MBEs and new entrants to secure financing. MBEs especially continue to experience great difficulty securing access to capital in the broadband space, end quote. Members of Congress also are asking the Commission to abandon the Title II route, citing the investment and economic risk that they fear will come with it. Here is a segment of a letter from 74 Democratic House members. "The uncertainty this proposal creates will jeopardize jobs and deter needed investment for years to come. The significant regulatory impact of reclassifying broadband service is not something that should be taken lightly and should not be done without additional direction from Congress. We urge you not to move forward with a proposal that undermines critically important investment in broadband and the jobs that come with it," end quote. In fact, a large bipartisan majority of Congress consisting of at least 291 members, I didn't check my morning's email, the number could be higher, has weighed in asking the Commission to discard this idea or at least to wait for Congress to act. In other words, a commanding majority of the directly elected representatives of the American people do not want the FCC to try to regulate broadband internet access as a monopoly phone service. If my colleagues feel compelled to act, however, I hope that they would keep an open mind about an idea I have proffered for a couple of years now and that would certainly withstand appeal. In the absence of new rules, which already have started to create uncertainty and will be litigated in court for years, Let us create a new role for the FCC to spotlight allegations of anti-competitive conduct while working with non-governmental internet governance groups and consumer protection and antitrust agencies. In each of the small numbers of cases that cited by proponents of network management rules, all were rectified quickly without new rules. The recently announced technical advisory group could serve as a component of such an endeavor. Additionally, it is my hope that instead of diverting precious resources towards creating new regulations, we focus on adopting policies that will create abundance, competition, and jobs. For instance, we could recapture the bipartisan and unanimous spirit of 2008 when the Commission approved the concept of unlicensed use of the television white spaces. This effort needs to be re-energized. American consumers will benefit tremendously from unimaginable applications and devices that will use white spaces. Use of this spectrum is also an antidote to potential anti-competitive conduct by broadband providers, as it will inject more competition into the last mile. For instance, if one last mile broadband provider were to act in an anti-competitive way, it would risk losing its customer to a white spaces provider. Or, as the Commission unanimously stated in 2008, we also anticipate that these new devices will have economic benefits for consumers and businesses by facilitating the development of additional competition in the broadband market. End quote. In sum, the Commission has many avenues it can pursue to further the cause of more broadband deployment and adoption without having to take on the risk associated with a Title II classification. I respectfully ask my colleagues to listen to the growing chorus of a large and bipartisan majority of voices in Congress and consider these different paths in lieu of the course that they are seeking to embark upon now. In the meantime, I fundamentally disagree with the premise that has been offered to support this item. As a result, I respectfully dissent. But I do want to thank Steve Van Rokel for inventing PowerPoint.
Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, would like to join in welcoming our colleagues who are headed for another meeting from Pakistan, and I look forward to meeting with you in a few hours. Thank you. And, of course, I, too, will like to welcome my mother and thank her for, I guess, everything. I appreciate it. Thank you, Austin, and your team for your superb work on this item. It is essential for us to ask probing questions that will enable this agency to gather the information required to make informed and sensible policy decisions. This notice of inquiry sets forth the leading theories about how we can accomplish our shared goals for broadband service in the wake of the Comcast decision. It affords all interested parties, industry, public interest groups, public officials, and ordinary Americans the opportunity to weigh in on the specific legal and policy merits of those proposals. The item succeeds in taking a difficult and combustible topic and presenting it in a way that should produce meaningful and fruitful discourse. My fear, however, is that there are efforts that aim to stifle our ability to engage in productive discussions about these pressing issues. Indeed, it appears that we are a long way from a sincere debate on the merits of these proposals. There is, I believe, a great deal of misinformation being disseminated, which is creating mixed and misplaced anxiety. Perhaps most notably, one of the current narratives being put forth is that proceeding with this inquiry, let alone a change in classification, would freeze investments in the network. This argument is specious. First, highly respected telecommunications analysts at firms such as Bank of America Merrill Lynch, UBS, and Goldman Sachs have each noted that the public reaction by industry to the chairman's proposal is overblown. In fact, they believe the current landscape presents a tremendous buying opportunity. As one well-regarded analyst stated, and I quote, "The FCC's third-way reclassification largely keeps the status quo intact, with key points being 1, no rate regulation, 2, no unbundling, 3, forbearance is difficult to overturn, 4, no inconsistent state regulation. 5, no competitive advantage to DBS or telco versus cable. And 6, wireless has a similar third-way reclassification, which has not negatively impacted the business model. Second, the public relations campaign being waged by some may, in fact, itself be the catalyst for doubts about investment. We should not be surprised when the all-out effort to spin the chairman's proposal as one that entails extensive regulation scares off potential investors. If you yell, "The sky is falling," enough times, people will eventually take cover. Third, as noted earlier, wireless voice communications are currently subject to a nearly identical regulatory regime. And those services, as you know, have flourished. In fact, as some of my colleagues shared at the agenda meeting last month, the level of investment in the wireless sector has been mind-boggling. Investors and companies have poured billions upon billions of dollars into an industry subject to Titles II and III. Massive investment has taken place and continues to take place under a parallel paradigm. But I understand why some interests balk at government oversight. They view any government authority as a threat to their unbridled freedom. Indeed, if it were up to them, we would not enact rules, but rather rely on voluntary organizations and forums made up solely of industry personnel to give us advice on how to serve as a backstop for consumers. I suppose one benefit of this model is that I could significantly shorten my workday and concentrate on my marathon training. The problem for me, however, is that I truly care about ensuring that every American has the opportunity to get broadband through our universal service program. I take seriously the threats to cybersecurity. I know all too well the challenge the internet poses to our privacy. I strongly believe that ISP speeds and bills should be transparent. And I am committed to ensuring that people with disabilities have meaningful access to all that broadband has to offer. There is no effort, no matter how well funded and concentrated, that will undermine my belief in these essential goals. Today's NOI is a positive step towards fulfilling some key aspects of the National Broadband Plan. I intend on working closely with those companies, organizations, and individuals who engage seriously and forthrightly with these difficult issues. By working together, I have no doubt that we can produce an outcome that continues to foster investment in innovation and that serves the American public. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for showing great leadership and vision. I am pleased to support this inquiry.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner Baker.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to Ms. Clyburn, and welcome to an overflow crowd here at the FCC. Clearly a lot of interest in what we're doing here. The foundation of a strong national broadband policy is already in place, and we do not need to alter the regulatory classification of broadband internet access to achieve the important goals unanimously agreed to in our joint statement on broadband. We have a proven way forward under the existing information services classification by lawfully asserting our direct and ancillary authority to address universal service reform, disability access, and other consensus policy goals. I greatly appreciate the Chairman's inclusion of a robust and balanced discussion of how the Commission could proceed based upon the existing classification, and hope this demonstrates a good faith effort to reach a true bipartisan solution. Unfortunately, I'm compelled to dissent because there are significant consequences to even initiating this far-reaching proceeding. Although I generally support building robust public records to support the Commission's work and asking questions that lead to a developed analysis of all sides of an issue, this is the rare case where opening a proceeding creates so much regulatory uncertainty that it harms incentives for investment in broadband infrastructure and makes providers and investors alike think twice about moving forward with network investments under this dark regulatory cloud. This outcome can only harm consumers who need better, faster, and more ubiquitous broadband today. For those that suggest the D.C. Circuit forced our hand, I respectfully disagree. Nothing in the recent Comcast decision requires the Commission to revisit broadband's classification. I also have significant concerns that the outcome of this proceeding has been prejudged. The Chairman has publicly endorsed the so-called third way approach in the days leading up to this notice, and I cannot support such a conclusion. At the outset, I reject the effort to rebrand a Title II classification with forbearance as a middle ground. It is not. There will be time to address all of the legal and factual infirmities of a Title II approach for broadband and its adverse impact on capital markets, consumers, and international regulatory norms. Today, I will limit my initial comments to the central question of legal and regulatory predictability. This approach will subject the Internet and consumers to years of litigation and uncertainty. I acknowledge that retaining our Title I framework is not without some legal risk too. No approach is. It is, however, substantially less risky than reclassifying broadband and overturning 40 years of Commission precedent codified by Congress and affirmed by the courts. And if legal certainty is paramount, only Congress has the ability to provide the Commission with clear jurisdictional footing and direction to move forward to tackle the challenges of the broadband age. It is also important to view this proceeding in the context of other recent statements in which the Commission has conveyed a pessimistic view of competition and market conditions. First, we had the National Broadband Plan that did not conclude that having more than 80% of Americans living in markets with more than one provider capable of offering download speeds in excess of 4 megabits per second was a success. Last month, the Commission was silent as to whether a wireless market in which 91.3% of Americans can choose from 4 or more providers is competitive. Then, in releasing consumer survey results this month, the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau's headline was that 80% of households do not know their broadband speeds. The more important and positive fact to me was that 91% of consumers are satisfied with their broadband speed, yet that finding received significantly less attention. The next test will be the Section 706 report, in which the Commission will have to evaluate whether broadband deployment is timely and reasonable, a finding that has been made in the affirmative in every prior report. Taken as a whole, I have concerns that these statements represent a view that government should try to engineer better results, and a Title II classification would certainly provide a stronger platform from which to take a more intrusive regulatory approach. I recognize that industry alone will not solve every challenge, and no commercial market is perfect, but I fear a more proactive broadband regulatory approach would adversely affect consumers, competition, and investment. I want to thank the staff for the hard work that went into this item, and I truly appreciate that this notice does not close the door on Title I. I agree with the Chairman that we share many of the same policy goals, and I commit to working with my colleagues constructively on a consensus broadband agenda. Reclassifying and regulating an entire sector of the Internet is not necessary to achieve this agenda. I am hopeful that this proceeding will not divert the agency's or the industry's resources and attention away from addressing the core spectrum, broadband adoption, and broadband deployment challenges facing our nation in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Austin, Julie, David, first, thanks to each of you for your hard and excellent legal work. We appreciate it very much. In March, we released our country's first national broadband plan, an unprecedented and bold roadmap for America's broadband future. The Commission affirmed unanimously that, quote, working to make sure that America has world-leading high-speed broadband networks, both wired and wireless, lies at the very core of the FCC's mission in the 21st century. In this increasingly interconnected world, broadband is our most important platform for investment, economic growth, job creation, and for addressing major national challenges such as education, healthcare, and public safety. As the National Broadband Plan recognized, however, America lags behind where it should be on broadband. The rest of the world isn't standing still, and government has a limited but vital role to play in spurring ubiquitous, fast, competitive, and affordable broadband networks available to every American. In April, the D.C. Circuit issued a decision in the Comcast case that, unfortunately, created uncertainty in an area that had been widely regarded as settled. As our General Counsel described today, while acknowledging the agency's basic authority under the Communications Act to address issues of broadband access, the court opinion cast doubt on the particular legal theory the Commission had chosen to rely on for several years to support its efforts in this area. This unwelcome decision, which the FCC argued against, was, as others have described to me, a curveball. Last month I said the Commission would initiate a process to explore and ultimately find a solution and resolve the uncertainty created by the decision. In particular, I said the Commission would consider all appropriate legal theories and would continue the same light touch approach to broadband policy that the agency has pursued for the past decade and more. Recently, the chairman of the key Senate and House committees, Chairman Rockefeller, Kerry, Waxman, and Boucher, launched a process to update the Communications Act. Let me take this opportunity to say clearly, I fully support this congressional effort. A limited update of the Communications Act could lock in an effective broadband framework to promote investment and innovation, foster competition, and empower consumers. I commit all available FCC resources to assisting Congress in its consideration of how to improve and clarify our communications laws. Meanwhile, in view of the court decision, and as the congressional chairs have requested, the FCC has an obligation to move forward with an open, constructive, public comment process to ask hard questions, to build a record, to find a solution and resolve the uncertainty that has been created. The congressional and FCC processes are complementary. It's important to note that the recent court decision did not opine on the initiatives and policies that we have laid out transparently in the National Broadband Plan and elsewhere. Our pro-investment, pro-innovation, pro-competition, pro-consumer policies remain unchanged, and they remain essential for broadband in America. The purpose of the proceeding we launched today is to make sure those policies rest on a solid legal foundation by exploring and addressing the technical legal questions that the court decision unavoidably raises. For example, American businesses and consumers need safe and secure broadband networks, yet the court case raises questions about the right framework for the Commission to help protect against cyber attacks. American businesses and consumers need broadband networks that reach every community and every American, rural and urban, regardless of circumstances. Yet the court case raises questions about the right framework for the Commission to help bring the benefits of broadband to the tens of millions of Americans and the many schools, libraries, and other anchor institutions that either don't have access to adequate broadband or can't afford the service. American businesses and consumers need broadband networks that will serve as a powerful engine for investment and innovation. Yet the court case raises questions about the right framework for the Commission to safeguard the freedom and openness of the Internet, which has fueled such extraordinary investment and innovation, vast consumer benefits and choice, which has led to unprecedented opportunities to spread knowledge and facilitate new and diverse voices, and which for several years has been protected by a bipartisan FCC. These and other issues affected by the court decision, like access by people with disabilities, like privacy, are real issues with real consequences for every American, and the nation's agency with oversight responsibility for communications has a duty to address them. We do so today in an open and balanced way. The notice of inquiry we adopt puts out for comment, even-handedly, several possible solutions to the challenge created by the court case, including a Title I path, a Title II path, and a middle ground solution, the third way approach that I have previously described, that David Tannenbaum described earlier today. The notice also solicits new ideas. The third way approach was developed out of a desire to restore the status quo light touch framework that existed prior to the court case. It was developed as a potential response to a court decision that would reject the extremes, a response that rejects both the extreme of applying extensive legacy phone regulation to broadband. It would reject that approach, and also rejects the extreme of eliminating FCC oversight of broadband access. It's not hard to understand why companies subject to an agency's oversight would prefer no oversight at all if they had the chance. But a system of checks and balances in the communications sector has served our country well for many decades, fostering trillions of dollars of investment in wired and wireless communications networks and in content applications and services, and creating countless jobs and consumer benefits. There is no question that we need to pursue a framework and policy initiatives that encourage and unlock massive private investment. Internationally, the third way would enable continued leadership on communications policy and internet freedom, while doing nothing would leave the U.S. virtually alone in the world in not having tools to protect broadband competition and consumers and preserve internet freedom and openness worldwide. I suggested the third way approach as a possible, reasonable, and narrow, tailored path for promoting the massive private investment we need in broadband and achieving broadly supported policy goals. I suggested it as a preferable alternative to the approach of applying full Title II to broadband, an approach that would take monopoly legacy phone rules and apply them all to broadband access, an approach that is unacceptable to me. While the term third way may be new to this debate, the model on which it's based is familiar. The third way is modeled on the highly successful deregulatory approach that the FCC has used for almost 20 years for mobile voice services. Application of a small number of Title II provisions with broad and reliable forbearance from all other provisions. The mobile voice experience has shown the wisdom of leaving pricing to competitive markets, as well as the ability of the Commission to forbear from regulation effectively and without backsliding. Industry has repeatedly hailed this framework as having spurred robust investment and innovation. So it is not surprising that the third way has received support from a broad array of businesses and investors, representing many billions of dollars of investment and serving millions of consumers and small and large enterprises. Supporters who believe the third way is a path to boost robust investment and competition in the U.S. include major American internet and technology companies, competitive broadband access providers, rural mobile companies, consumer electronics manufacturers, entertainment companies, successful investors and entrepreneurs, as well as leading consumer groups. Now, as we move forward, my focus is not on any particular legal mechanism. My desire is simply that we restore the status quo and have a workable, light-touch framework for broadband access. My core focus is on achieving vital national broadband goals to spur investment, innovation, and our global competitiveness. In order to do that, we must solve the problem the Comcast case has created. I recognize that there are pros and cons to all of the potential solutions that have been raised, and that this is not an easy issue or one without complexity. I remain open-minded. I welcome the possibility of new ideas. I'm pleased that the announcement of an FCC process has already catalyzed action among stakeholders. I encourage these consensus-building actions and discussions to find an enforceable framework for broadband policy. I'm pleased also that this process has produced healthy dialogue inside the Commission, among the Commission staff and among those of us here on the bench. There are a number of different views as we begin tackling these issues. I believe firmly and deeply in the benefits of a free marketplace of ideas, of robust discussion and public debate, and its potential to produce the best answers to hard questions as long as all keep open minds. I ask only this of all participants in the discussion. Let's not pretend that the problems with the state of broadband in America don't exist. Let's not pretend that the risk of excessive regulation is not real. Or at the other extreme, that the absence of basic protections for competition and consumers is acceptable. Instead, let's put rhetoric and posturing aside and work together to solve the problem created by the court case so that we can rise together to the major 21st century challenges of achieving U.S. world leadership in broadband innovation, fostering sustainable economic growth and job creation, and bringing the benefits of broadband to all Americans. With that, I will ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and the request for editorial privileges is granted. So thank you again. Before we adjourn, let me make a few brief acknowledgments. First, again, to Austin, Schlick, the team at OGC, Julie, David, staff, and other bureaus who continue to work so hard on this complex and important issue. I know that this in particular seems on many days like a thankless task, and we appreciate that you've made the decision to be in public service to work on hard issues like these. So thank you. Let me recognize two new interns who will be working in the chairman's office this summer. First, Eric Schmidt, a 3L at the University of Colorado Law School. Eric, please stand up. And Jason Miller, a 2L at Duke Law School. Not yet CEO of any major company. Welcome to both of you, and thanks in advance for your hard work. Let me express my sincere thanks to David Goldman. David, where are you? A round of applause for David. David has been in the chairman's office since day one, which feels like 2 weeks ago. Except to David, it feels like a decade. You've been a great help and a great spirit to have in the office. We wish you very well. We're glad you're staying at the commission. You'll be returning to the Wireless Bureau, and the Wireless Bureau will be lucky to have you. So thank you, David, very much. And last, before I ask my colleagues for comments, acknowledgments, I'd like to recognize our great OET chief, Julie Knapp. Julie, are you here? Julie is here. Julie's the only person who can get applause without even people knowing why they're actually applauding for Julie. And it's not because we share a name. This evening, the FCBA will present Julie with its annual Excellence in Government Services Award. I know everyone will agree with me that the FCBA couldn't have made a better choice. We all know Julie, and we know what makes him such a remarkable professional is that he's a remarkable person. Although Julie's engineering expertise is certainly extraordinary, it's his personal qualities, his honesty, integrity, decency, brilliance, that truly set him apart and make him a model of what we all look for in our public servants. And in fact, Julie, I particularly thank you for being such a great mentor to all of the young engineers and others who come through the commission. We are trying to get you more. Julie, we're fortunate to have you here at the FCC and to have had you. I'm not sure I should say the date because it's a long time, and you couldn't, maybe you started when you were 10. 3 decades. It's my pleasure to thank you and applaud you for your service to the commission and congratulate you on the award you'll win tonight. And now, before we adjourn, do any of my colleagues have announcements? Commissioner Copps?
I do. First of all, I would like to associate myself with the comments you so eloquently made about Julie. He is a absolute delight to work with. He brings real credibility to public service. He's one of those people, everybody bemoans government, but when we look at the quality of service of some of the public servants that work in this place, it really shines a bright light and reflects well on the agency and on public service. And Julie just brings that dedication. I know he just lies awake at night worrying about a lot of this stuff. He really gets into it. He brings a level of expertise and common sense judgment and ability to bring all of the players together. So I think he's a shining star at the FCC, and I'm delighted that he is receiving this recognition tonight that he so richly deserves. The COPS office is fortunate and uncommonly blessed this year to be hosting 4 of the most diligent summer law clerks in all of the history of this commission's storied past. Jay All, please stand, Jay, hails from the vast great state of Montana. He has journalistic experience, having worked for a fine newspaper, the Billings Gazette. He is entering his final year of law school at Catholic University. Prior to law school, he worked at the National Geographic Channel and at the FBI as an intelligence analyst, and which of these many talents we will mostly rely on remains to be seen, but we welcome him. Danielle Andrews Lovell, please stand. Also brings impressive background to the commission. She received her bachelor's degree from Harvard University in biochemical sciences, and then somehow found her way to Georgetown Law Center, where she is exploring telecommunications law, to which she brings a sense of justice that can only enhance the reputation of communications law. And at Georgetown, she's an Orrick Scholar and a Law Center Scholar. Frank Gonzalez. Frank, where are you? Also has a welcome and refreshing interest in public interest law, and that's something we're always on the lookout for. He's going to be starting his 3rd year of law school at George Washington University. Last summer, he attended the Max Planck Institute for Intellectual Property in Munich. Does that sound intimidating or what? It does to me. And he has worked on the rights issues as a legal clerk for the Alliance of Artists and Recording Companies. And lastly, Michael Park, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of Southern California's Annenberg School for Communications. We love lawyers, but we love other disciplines too. Michael has an abiding emphasis and interest in new media and communications law and the First Amendment. He received his law degree from Hastings, already brought his unique perspective to our work on the many media matters pending before the commission. So we're glad and proud to have this fine group of young scholars working with us. If you want to see their diligence at work, you ought to just walk down the hall and come through our side door at just about any hour of the day, and you'll see the 4 of them sitting there just diligently researching great projects and thinking great thoughts and turning out wonderful work on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McDowell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We too have 4 summer law clerks I'd like to introduce the folks to. They've also been working around the clock. I'm not sure as hard maybe as the COPS sweatshop, it sounds like, but call the authorities perhaps. You can come to me confidentially if you'd like, the COPS law clerk. Last month you all met Timothy Kennedy. Why don't you just stand? We have a lot of new faces. I introduced you last month, but wanted to refresh because there are some new faces here today. Also joining us since Timothy joined us last month is Rachel Costello. She also has a background in journalism. She was an intern for Tim Russert, the late great Tim Russert at Meet the Press, as well as having worked at WKRC and WDIV, both of them TV stations, network affiliates, as well as the Michigan Office of the Attorney General. Her undergrad degree is from Miami University in Mass Communications and American Studies, and she is currently a law student at Michigan State. Thank you, Rachel. Next up, Jameson Dempsey. Jameson is at Brooklyn Law School, where he is editor-in-chief of the Brooklyn Law Review. He is also a Boston College Eagle, where I had 3 great uncles who were Jesuits, who at one point taught there, by the way. I forgot to tell you that. He has studied in London and has also worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he's working very hard for us. Thank you, Jameson. And then last up is Brooke Erickson. Brooke is a familiar face here at the FCC, having been a legal intern at our own Enforcement Bureau earlier this year. She is also has a very impressive resume, but worked for the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, something near and dear to my heart, and as well as an undergraduate, she's working at law school at American University. Her undergraduate thesis, by the way, is very interesting. The Idea of America, Charles Kuralt as a Modern Alexis de Tocqueville. So there's obviously a philosopher's streak there in her. And that was part of her journalism and mass communications and American studies major at, and I have some breaking news for you, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So yes, your ears did not deceive you, Commissioner Copps. I hired a Tar Heel. And I think this marks the beginning of a new era of a different kind of bipartisanship among us. So, but welcome to all of them.
Thank you. All set, Commissioner Clyburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I normally don't disagree with Commissioner Copps. I'm a fan. But the best team on the 8th floor in terms of interns I am about to introduce you to, Elizabeth Ruiz. Where are you? There you are. Elizabeth, we've got a little bit in common. Elizabeth came to South Carolina by way of her father's military service, graduated from high school in Sumter, South Carolina, graduated from the University of South Carolina, go Cox, and magna cum laude. I didn't quite do that, but I did graduate. She's a former news assistant and staff writer at the state newspaper and is currently a law student at the University of North Carolina School of Law in Chapel Hill. Welcome. And present to you now Jeffrey Cow. Jeffrey is a co-founder and director of a startup company of engineers who are developing smartphone application for tracking carbon emissions. There's some people in Congress probably want to speak to you as it relates to energy policy, but we'll talk about that later. He is a graduate of the University of Waterloo in Canada. Of course, he was on a dean's list also, and is now at Columbia Law School in New York. Welcome. And last but not least is Christina Cobb, who is a graduate of the University of Maryland College Park. She is attending she's at Howard University Law School, and she is proficient in Spanish and Modern Standard Arabic, spoken and written in basic Korean and Japanese. Thank you and welcome. As I said, the best team of interns on the 8th floor. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker.
Oh dear, I respectfully disagree. We too are incredibly blessed with the intelligence and the hardworking, the enthusiasm fresh faces bring to the office. It's a great fun to have you guys. First I want to introduce you to Henry Greenwich. Henry is working towards a joint JD MBA at University of Baltimore. He's familiar probably to a bunch of you because he's worked throughout the FCC, but now we're lucky enough to have him. Thank you, Henry. Ray Hashem is joining us from Northwestern Law School, where he has just completed his first year. Ray brings with him engineering experience, and his background has proven extremely valuable to us on many of our projects. So we really welcome you and are glad you're here, Ray. Thanks. And last but not least is Gessie McLaughlin. Gessie is studying political science, public policy, and law at Trinity College, and she's great. So come by, meet them. They're fun. Just looking at them makes you realize how important the work is that we do here. I saw Henry Gola in the crowd earlier. Henry was our intern last semester. We liked him so much we're having him back next semester. So have a good clerkship and get ready to come work again. So thanks. We appreciate all your hard work, your dedication, and we are lucky to have you. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam Secretary,
Yes.
what remains for us to do?
Well, we can announce our next meeting,
Let's announce.
and you can adjourn.
Let's do that. When will our next meeting be?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission will be Thursday, July 15th, 2010.
Thank you very much. And with that, we are adjourned.
Testing 1, 2, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to start clearing the room for the press conference. We are going to, the same procedure as we've had in recent meetings. The chairman is due back here in another 5 minutes or so, and he will commence the news conference. And after that, we'll turn it over to the staff briefing portion. I want to remind everyone this is for press only to participate in. We ask the press to come to the front presenters table where the mics are live, because this also is being televised, and any members of the public are welcome to sit in the back and observe, but questions only will be taken from the press. So if the press could please move to the front table, and we'll be ready when the chairman gets back here in a few minutes. Thank you.
good to go? Good to go. All right. Hi, everyone. I see some new faces. Welcome.
All right, who wants first question? There you go.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, Phil Goldstein from Fierce Wireless. I'm assuming that this process that's ongoing right now is going to have to play itself out before the commission actually even begins to think about moving forward on the open internet proceeding. Is that the way that this is going to work out in terms of timelines? That the reclassification issue is going to have to be resolved before anything else can be decided?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think we haven't said anything publicly about how the different proceedings will relate to each other. We've been very clear about goals. So I think on that, if we could get back to you with any timetables that we're looking at, but of course, there's a relationship.
Chairman, there was some suggestion by other commissioners that might have already been a decision or a prejudgment in this proceeding, and I know you've said you've kept an open mind, but what can you say to sort of reassure people that that's not the case, or maybe it is the case?
It is the case. I mean, I actually think we have, each of us, an obligation to keep an open mind as we run a public process. There's no point in having a notice and comment process unless people don't bring open minds to it. So I think that's very important. Obviously, people have experiences, points of view, initial thoughts, but I think keeping an open mind is essential.
Matt Cover with CNSnews.com. I think Commissioner McDowell kind of alluded to this in his opening statement, but as I understand it, the Telecommunications Act of '96 kind of explicitly says that it's the policy of the government to preserve the market for the internet, in its words, unfettered by federal or state regulations. So even in the third way approach, doesn't moving away from ancillary jurisdiction run afoul of that pretty clear statement there in the law by imposing just even the small regulations that I think you were talking about?
I don't. If I could just draw your attention to the way in which mobile voice, the regulatory framework for mobile voice for the last 15 years, a light touch framework that relies on a small number of Title II provisions with significant forbearance is the model for this particular option as we go through the process. I think to the extent that you have sort of specific, let me answer to this, well, let me do this. To the extent that you have specific legal questions, how do all these things work together? We have a fantastic legal team, and I'm sure they'd be happy to sit down with you. I think what I can do is try to be really clear about the goals. I believe very strongly that we need to have a framework for broadband access that is a light touch framework that is what we had before and what everyone assumed was the case before the Comcast decision. And so to me, a central purpose of this process is to determine what is a framework that's available to us that restores the status quo, that restores the light touch status quo that relies on competitive markets and that continues the approach to broadband that had existed prior to the Comcast decision.
So is it?
All right, I'm sorry. We have very limited time today, so.
Okay.
David Chafee, U.S. Broadband Report. Chairman, what do you say to the people who say that this whole net neutrality proceeding is intrusive and a momentum killer for all of the momentum that's been built up with the broadband stimulus program and the National Broadband Plan? I mean, it is an obstacle in a sense. It is seeming to divert a lot of attention away from that.
Well, a couple of points. We've had rules in place preserving a free and open internet now for several years, and we've seen how having backstop authority with respect to preserving internet freedom and openness spurs investment, spurs innovation. And so the goal that I've been talking about for quite some time is preserving that extraordinary open architecture of the internet that has been such a boon to entrepreneurs, to small businesses, to new speakers, to new entrants, to massive investment. I've been very clear about that. I've also been very clear that we need to find ways to accelerate and increase investment in the network infrastructure itself. We need both in this country to succeed. We need a healthy, robust, intelligent set of communications networks, fast, extensive, ubiquitous, and we need world-leading innovation on top of those networks. And all our policies have been designed to drive investment and innovation across the board. We have to deal with this court decision because we have to deal with this court decision. As I said, it's a curveball, not something that we wanted to have to deal with, but also not something that it would be in the interests of the country, in the interests of a broadband future, in the interests of a free and open internet to ignore. So what we're trying to do is identify the options that would restore the framework to what existed before, one that people were comfortable with. We've identified as a model the mobile framework, and people can evaluate whether that has worked or not. The overwhelming consensus is that that has been a model for the last 10, 15 years that has generated investment, innovation, and competition. And I think we'll. And I guess the other point I'd make is, as I said in my remarks, my focus, what I wake up every day and work on here at the Commission, are advancing the large goals around promoting broadband deployment everywhere in America, which will require massive private investment and also reforming the Universal Service Fund, unleashing spectrum so that we can lead the world in mobile, making sure that there's basic consumer protections. And we have terrific lawyers here who are working on this hard, complex legal issues about what sections of the Communications Act we should point to as we move forward. There's no question that the Communications Act gives us authority. There's also no question that the Communications Act can be improved. And that's why we're working with Congress, and that's why I wanted to make it very clear today that I support the effort in Congress to update the Communications Act to clarify and help bring certainty to, as a result of the issues created by the court decision.
Okay, we only have time for one more question, so, Todd.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Chairman. Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. I apologize if this has been asked and answered, but can you say clearly what's at the end of this proceeding that you opened today? Will you take a vote at some point on whether you have so-called third-way authority, or will you just say the comments are great and I'm going to run with them and assert third-way authority? What's at the end, and when will we get a decision?
Yeah, I'd say again that all of us are obliged to have an open mind and to tackle something like this step by step as the record comes in. As I mentioned, a number of promising activities, discussions, efforts have been catalyzed by this process. I think we all agree that increasing the area of consensus, finding a framework that works would be desirable, and I'm going to continue to work on doing everything I can to cause that to happen.
How long will you continue to work on this path? Done before the election?
Yeah, Todd, I haven't thought about timetables. Court decision has come out. We've started a process. We'll get comments. We'll work with all stakeholders, and of course, we'll work with Congress. I really do think one of the things that I am pleased about is the growing consensus around goals. And so some of what you heard today about goals around broadband deployment, goals around universal service, goals around leading the world in broadband, an acknowledgement that we've got some problems we have to tackle. We have some issues we have to work on. To have the growing consensus around that is actually an accomplishment that I'm proud of. We will figure out a way to deal with the underlying legal framework. To me, the really hard issues are once we agree on goals for the country around our global competitiveness, around broadband as a platform for economic growth, platform for helping address healthcare and education, being able to work on tackling all those issues substantively from a policy perspective, that's hard work. We made a lot of progress in the broadband plan, and we need to and we will continue to move forward on those. And that's what will make a difference in the country.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you staying. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now proceed to the staff portion of the press briefing following the agenda meeting. Austin Schlick, General Counsel, will be able to take any questions you have about the item. Are there any questions? Lynn?
Let me actually just start by taking the chairman's hand off your question about Section 230 of the Act and the language. Let me just tell you what that section says, and that was the lead section on which we relied in the Comcast case, and the court said that our ancillary authority wasn't sufficient to allow us to pursue it. It is the policy of the United States to promote the continued development of the Internet and other interactive computer services, interactive media, to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market, and to encourage the deployment of technologies that maximize user control over what information is received. So the congressional policy statement in that section clearly contemplates a role for the Commission in doing those things.
Lynn?
Lynn Stanton, TRW. Will we be seeing a text of the NOI anytime soon, and will it contain an actual laying out of what the legal justification would be for any of these three proposals, and in particular the third way?
We hope and expect to have it out soon, certainly this afternoon. It attempts to track all of the arguments of which we're aware, whether generated within this building or outside this building, and ask the best questions we can about their sufficiency.
But not actually laying out something equivalent to what you would argue in court if you had to go and defend.
Well, we try to lay out all three of them.
Okay.
So it's essentially each of the three options and then questions about them.
Okay.
John?
Hi, John Porter, Reuters. I was wondering if you could give us sort of your estimated time frame as to how long a court challenge might get resolved if and when the industry does file such a complaint.
There are two possible paths. One path is you continue under the current Title I classification, and in that case, the court challenge is the challenge to each of the ensuing substantive rules. So you all have seen the Commission schedule for implementation of the broadband plan, for example. You can anticipate that after the adoption date for a particular substantive item, you go to court, and one of the challenges, if it's challenged, will be to the Commission's ancillary authority. And so that plays out over a number of years as those items work their way through the pipeline. The other approach would be if broadband connectivity is reclassified, then you have a single court case that would be a challenge to whatever action is taken in this proceeding just opened today. That sort of proceeding is one where industry, I assume, would have an interest in expediting, I'm assuming from the moment that they've challenged. The Commission historically has agreed to expedited treatment of those. It would depend on what circuit you're in, but we certainly would hope for a hearing in court within some number of months, months certainly not years, and we would absolutely support quick resolution.
So we're talking, if it was a second option, we're talking about well into 2012 maybe?
Well, no, you start with the adoption date, which the chairman just told you he hasn't set a schedule. So take whatever date as the start date. Then you're going to have briefing and argument. We would urge in some number of months, and that would get you a decision in 2011. If you want to hypothesize Supreme Court review, then you can add some. It's up to a year on top of that, but. Again, I think you're going to have the same schedule. It's just a question of whether it's done quickly in one case or whether it's done in dribs and drabs on review of each of the substantive orders over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Good afternoon, Paul Mervigallo, BNA. There's been a lot of dispute about under the third way what would be affected, an ISP's assets, infrastructure, backbone. I was hoping you could comment further on, assuming this commission goes forward on the third way, what exactly would this affect? Would this reach the backbone, or is it, there's been this debate over the delivery versus the delivery pizza, the pizza delivery. Yeah. So if you could just so I'm clear.
Sure. When you see the notice of inquiry this afternoon, you'll see that it's, I think, quite clear as we could be, about the scope, and that is that we are talking about the consumer broadband services that were classified as information services in 2002, 2005, 2006, 2007. So that's the connection between the end user and the internet. We ask questions about exactly how to define it, but we also specifically exclude the backbone, for example, which you mentioned, and there are a number of services that we specifically mention as not being included.
Can I follow up on that? Because I've heard people argue that, say for example, Netflix streaming video, that what they're doing under sort of the old computer inquiry type thing is they're bundling a transmission service, connection to the internet with video content, and that what you're proposing to do would basically, you'd have to separate their information service from their basic service the same way that you're proposing to separate the email and data storage of the ISP service from their transmission service, and you would have to treat the underlying resold transmission service of a Netflix the same way you were treating the transmission service of an ISP. And do you have a response to that?
Sure. The response is right in the Communications Act. That's what an information service is. An information service is the running of information over telecommunications. So the idea that you have to separate every such service into two services is just directly contradicted by the Act. The question that was at issue in the Brand X Supreme Court case and at issue in the cable modem decision that led up to that is, at what point do you view the information component as so, and this is the language of the 2002 order, inextricably intertwined, and that was language the Supreme Court picked up on, that the two should be viewed as a single service rather than as information running over the telecommunications. So go back to the earliest days of basic and enhanced services. The Lexis database, early database service, run over telecommunications, over an AT&T connection to the law firm or the press room. That was viewed as an information service being provided by Lexis and a telecommunications service, a basic service being provided by the phone company, and that's baked into the statute now through the 96 Act.
So I'm sorry, but I just want to make sure I really understand this.
Yeah.
So basically, in simple terms, what you're saying is that the way in which the ISP service is bundled with the information service, it's easier to separate out from the two components, the telecom and the information, than, say, the Lexis-style service that you were just talking about. Am I following you correctly?
No, the Lexis example is one in which you have the use of telecommunications to provide the service. Lexis is buying telecommunications, is in a sense bundling them, but that has always been viewed as two things, an information service and a telecom service. The distinctive feature, and I don't want to say novel, but I think it may have been the first time that we did it, of the cable modem order in 2002, was to say that the information component is so tied together with the transmission component that we're going to view them as a single thing, rather than as we had always viewed them before, as we were at the same time viewing DSL as being two services. One, the information, that's your home page, your email service. If they have a web hosting service, that's the information, and that's separate was the traditional view from the connectivity. The really unusual and distinctive thing about the 2002-2005 orders is we said there's really just one service.
Thank you very much.
I think just a couple more for this press conference. We're available for specific questions afterwards if you want to get into more detail. David?
General Counsel, currently there seems to be support for each one of these three frameworks among the commissioners. Two seem to support one seems to support a second, two seem to support the third way. Suppose there is not a consensus after this entire NOI proceeding is completed. How are you then going to define the FCC position if there's kind of an ongoing variety of options that people believe strongly in?
I think that's what the chairman does, and that's what the commission does as a body. It comes to consensus and it works together to get there.
Right, but I mean, okay, so through this process, then you
That's
will
what this
come
is
to
all
a
about,
consensus.
to ask the questions.
Okay.
That right now, Commissioner Clyburn suggested that much of the public debate is underinformed, and that's the purpose of this proceeding, to inform our own commission's analysis and also to inform the public and really ask the follow-up questions to the talking points that we've been hearing for the last couple of months.
One last question. Before we take the last question, we do now have copies of the printed text of the commissioners and the chairman's statements. So before you leave, reporters, Susan from OMR is back there making copies, and you're welcome to take them. David, last question?
Yeah, David Carney. If the commission does proceed with reclassification and forbearance, what would be your work product? Would that be a declaratory ruling, or would there also be a notice of proposed rulemaking at that time? And regarding the blanket or nationwide forbearances, would those be policy statements, or are those final orders subject to judicial review?
The notice of inquiry doesn't identify any particular next step, but the 2002 precedent, the cable modem classification as a single information service, is the most directly relevant precedent, and in that it was a declaratory ruling. So the classification was determined by a declaratory ruling. Forbearance we do routinely. We've been doing it since 1993. It really is a unique animal and is simply a forbearance decision. It's not a rulemaking. It doesn't require any further process other than that's initiated by this notice.
Okay. Thank you, Austin, and that concludes the press conference, and that concludes today's agenda meeting. Thank you.